Welcome to Where Her Heart Speaks, a show designed to challenge and disrupt ineffective thoughts and behaviors to help you not only embody peace, joy, calm, and certainty, but also to help you live the life you've always dreamed of living. Where Her Heart Speaks with Coach Catherine begins now.
Hi there, it's Coach Catherine. Did you know that according to studies, the workplace is the number one cause of stress in life? And according to the American Institute of Stress, 120,000 people die every year as a result of work-related stress. Listen, believe it or not, with a proactive approach, you can control your stress levels. To aid you in this journey, I've created a powerful infographic, and in just 3 minutes, you can alleviate stress by implementing just one of 5 strategies outlined in my complimentary infographic. Get your copy today at bit.ly/5 ways to de-stress. That's bit.ly/5 ways 2 de-stress, and start releasing your stress right away. As an alternative, if you prefer immediate support, go to www.calendly.com/Coach Catherine and book your free 30-minute clarity call. Welcome and welcome back. I am Catherine James, international speaker, best-selling author, trauma-informed coach, and your host for this show, Where Her Heart Speaks. On this last Wednesday of Black History Month, I want to talk about generational trauma. Now, I know a couple of weeks ago, I talked about maybe sharing some information about relationships in the spirit of Valentine's Day that has come and gone. But I'm not going to do that because, one, I have never been a person to go along with the crowd. Even when I say things, because I know that's what the majority does, I am often pulled in a different direction. And I just have to trust that. I have to trust that. I just have to trust it. And then 2, I do my best to take action based on divine promptings. So, real talk, the human part of me is telling me people are more interested in relationships than generational trauma, but my spirit, that place where my heart speaks, is telling me to talk about generational trauma this week or on this episode. Now, here's the thing, and here's what I know. Having a better understanding of generational trauma can help improve relationships, all relationships. And when you understand that behaviors that are so normal to them but drive you crazy and vice versa, behaviors that are so normal to you but drive them crazy, may be deeply rooted in generational implicit and explicit conditioning, you can be more empathetic. What I'll say, kind of an insert, you're going to have to likely work on your own wounds to get there. But it is possible. You can be more empathetic. You can be more compassionate, more understanding. And I'll get into that a bit more later. But for now, I really want to look at generational trauma. Many years ago, when I first started on my personal development journey, it's been more than 25 years. Easy. When I first started on my personal journey, I joined a personal development group. As a member of that personal development group, you would receive one book and multiple cassette tapes every single month. Now, for those who are younger and maybe not know what a cassette tape is. Today, we would receive access to multiple audio downloads, right? Cassette tapes were a means for listening to pre-recorded audios. And I remember receiving one cassette tape that I listened to over and over again. I don't know the name of it today, but I remember the stories shared to help the listeners really gain an understanding of the points that were being shared. One story that has always stayed with me was a story about how to cook a roast. It could have been a roast, it could have been a ham, but I don't know. I kind of remember a roast. So a roast or a ham, whatever. Not important. But the storyteller shared how she always cut off both ends of the roast before seasoning and cooking the roast, putting it in the pan and cooking it. When questioned about the process by her husband, she advised or told him that that was the appropriate way to cook a roast. Now, his disagreement made her call her mother, who she had learned to cook roast from. And she explained what was going on and how her husband had a different opinion about cutting off the ends of the roast. And her mother laughed and said, "Oh, sweetie, I only cut off the ends of the roast because I didn't have a pan big enough to fit the roast in." That story has always resonated with me. And years ago, long before I started studying about trauma and the effects of trauma, I began to wonder how many beliefs and behaviors in the Black community were consciously or unconsciously passed on from generation to generation. I wondered if whipping children in Black families, fathers' detachments to babies they created, and moms' inabilities to express love or praise their children were behaviors that had been transferred from one generation to another, dating all the way back to the days of chattel slavery. I wondered if teachings such as work twice as hard and being twice as good, or children must be seen and not heard, were rooted in field teachings as a method to avoid harsh punishment. I wondered if a large portion of people plagued with not feeling good enough was a result of. I began to wonder about these things in the mid-90s. And at that time, I hadn't heard of epigenetics or generational trauma. I had heard my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and her friends talk about generational curses as a child, but I didn't make the connection. And it wasn't until I began to study about trauma that this began to feel really real. Then I read Dr. Joy DeGruy's book titled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. This book brought together all of my fragmented thoughts, all of my wonderings. She answered my questions and further enlarged my curiosity. Dr. DeGruy spoke of how we fail to look at the role history has played in the adaptation of behavior in African Americans. Adaptations that were necessary to, and I quote, to survive the stifling effects of chattel slavery, end quote. As a parent, when you know that praising your child could bring attention to him or her and lead to your child being raped or sold away from you, or if you know that your child or a family member's talking back could lead to them being beaten, or If, as an individual, you know that making eye contact with someone who looks like you could have grave consequences, you develop protective strategies in hopes of keeping your loved ones and you out of harm's way. Now, we can probably all agree that living under those conditions were traumatic. We can probably understand why the enslaved behaved as they did. And where things get confusing is when we look at present day behaviors. We have to question, why is it that even though slavery ended in most U.S. states over 100 years ago, over 150 years ago, many African American parents still whip their children, still belittle their children in front of others? Why is it that when some African Americans see one another in passing, they fail to make eye contact and they fail to speak to one another? Why is it? It's interesting. My sister and I walk in a large public area where there are many other walkers. We have had several conversations about this. We can pass people that don't look like us, and many times they speak freely. But in passing people who do look like us, some, not all, let me be clear there, more than I would like, I'll say that also, they will look away or put their heads down. So my sister is often trying to make sense of the behavior, and I attempt to simplify it by explaining generational trauma and the nervous system. So many things began to make sense to me when I understood the effects of trauma in the nervous system. Now, you may find yourself thinking or saying, but slavery ended over 100 years ago, and thinking, why can't African Americans, why can't those people just get over it? Why haven't they gotten over it by now? They should have, right? After 100 years, 150 years, you would think that a group of people would have gotten over the impacts of treatment that happened so long ago. But as I said this past weekend in a webinar I was conducting, Pause to Release Stress, it is so much easier to be said than done. It's so much easier to be said than done. And what I believe is that we've grown accustomed to saying things like, just change your thinking and you can change your life, or what you think about is what you bring about, and many other nice cliches that make you believe that behaviors are surface level issues that can be changed simply by changing your mind. And I will say, if it were that easy. These issues are in our tissues. Now, I am talking in the context of African Americans because it's Black History Month. And if you are not African American, I want you to think about the roast in your life, in your family, or your culture. What behaviors have been passed down from one generation to the next? African Americans were treated brutally as a means of making them submit to other human beings. Fear is deeply rooted in the bodies of Black people. And although on the surface, it appears that We should be a change people. Like those traumas from long ago, they should no longer impact us. And they remain present in our nervous systems. They remain present in our beliefs. They remain present in our behaviors. So, what is generational trauma? Generational trauma is the present day expression of traumas experienced by prior generations. And they consciously or unconsciously have been passed on to the next generation. Epigenetics showed that the imprint of trauma can be transferred genetically. And in his book, It Didn't Start With You, Mark Wolynn shares several studies regarding epigenetic inheritance. And the two that I want to share with you shows how not only the first generation is affected, but also the second and the third generations are affected. Now, I just want you to think about that for a moment. You've got 3 generations impacted by an event. That third generation is the first generation for the next set of generations. So this is a perpetual events, perpetual transference that's taking place. So a 2014 study that was created, the study was conducted on mice. And what they did is they took male mice and created a prolonged period and repeated periods of intense stress. And they did this by taking those mice away from their mothers. The traumatized mice showed many depressive symptoms. The researchers then had those traumatized mice reproduce. And it was discovered that the pups, the babies of the mice, in both the second and third generations showed the same symptoms, even though they had never experienced the stress. And then there was another study in 2013 shared by Wolynn again in his book, It Didn't Start With You. This study was conducted by researchers at the University of Haifa. And it was found that female rats who experienced mild stress before conception and during pregnancy affected the offsprings. There was a higher concentration of a molecule that is involved with the body's response to stress. There was a higher concentration of that molecule found in the stressed female rats, the brains of those stressed female rats. And not only in their brains, but in their reproductive eggs and the brains of their offsprings. Generational trauma. And then there was another study that showed how stressed mothers delivered preterm babies, bore daughters and granddaughters who also had shorter pregnancies or delivered preterm babies, even though they had not experienced stress. So these studies clearly show that trauma can span at least 3 generations, even when the second and third generations are not exposed to the initial stressor. Based on the fact that they are transferring in eggs and in sperm, I would believe that it probably spans beyond 3 generations, but I'm not the researcher, and that has not yet been proven. But just logically, when you think about it, and I will say, unfortunately, a large number of African Americans continue to experience intense levels of stress as a result of long term and ongoing oppression and suppression. Traumas continue to pass from one generation to the next. Our bodies, our being African Americans, as that's who I am, our bodies still believe we are in danger, and our behaviors mirror those that we thought would keep us safe all those years ago. Sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. As I think about my son and being the mother of an African American male, my nervous system still detects the danger of having an African American son. And my behavior is always teaching him, telling him, he's an adult now, but telling him, be sure to conduct yourself in this manner when you come in the presence of police officers. My nervous system holds a stress, a fear that is associated with the behaviors received by African American males. Now, I've not really had any traumatic experiences with police directly in terms of African American males. And yet, and still, my nervous system feels that that is not safe. African American males coming in contact with police officers is not safe. Now, logically, I know that not all police officers are bad. Logically, I know after working on an account for police officers, the better part of 10 years, I think 15 years, I know what's in the nervous system of police officers. Logically, I know this. I've had numerous conversations with them, yet and still, my nervous system doesn't know that it's safe. So I want to say, as we close out Black History Month, I want to encourage you to never forget, never ignore, or attempt to erase history. Black history is my history, and Black history is your history. And although some believe that it should be hidden, as my great-grandmother used to say, the truth shall set you free. Now, really quickly, I said I would come back to relationships. And with a better understanding of generational trauma, that it is rooted and embedded in our tissues, can you see why something that seems simple to you or right to you may feel or may not feel simple or right to another person? If cutting the end of the roast, or we'll say self-expression, being vulnerable, or speaking up for yourself, or confrontation feels safe to your nervous system, but it feels like a threat to someone else's nervous system, there's going to be discord. Now, the funny thing here is both parties can want the same thing. They can want the same outcome. But until physiological healing occurs, there will always be discord. There's going to be discord within the individual internally. There's going to be discord within the relationship externally. As African Americans, those who are listening that are African Americans, and those who are not, I mean, if you have the information in regards to the history of African Americans, I'd invite you to consider all of the traumatic generational messages of danger embedded in your nervous system surrounding relationships. Now, I'm not going to go into them here, but when you reflect on our history, how men and women were conditioned to treat one another, and what would happen to them if either did not comply. Our nervous systems are still learning about the safety or lack thereof in relationships. As we heal our nervous system, we are better equipped to engage in the responses. We are better equipped to understand the beliefs and behaviors of others, but only after healing takes place. Without healing, we are both in a protective state. Our nervous systems respond from an activated state or a shutdown state. An activated state being fight or flight, or a shutdown state or dorsal state, shutdown, depression. So it takes healing to have effective relationships where we can look at another human being and not feel threatened by their beliefs or their behaviors. So I want to say, if this message resonates with you and you know or are wondering about your generational traumas, how they're showing up in your life, how they're impacting your relationships. They could be romantic relationships, friendships, work relationships. How they're impacting your relationship with yourself. I'd invite you to book a free clarity call with me today by going to www.calendly.com/Coach Catherine. When we understand better, we are left with a choice. Do we aim to do better, or do we do nothing? My prayer is that you will aim to do better. Do better by taking the steps to heal past wounds, to heal generational wounds that maybe didn't start with you, but reside in your body, reside in your nervous system. Wounds that shape your beliefs and perceptions and control your actions. As I close, I want to remind you that in this life, we get to choose. So choose to listen from the place where your heart speaks, and choose to live a sensational life. Peace and blessings.
Thank you for listening to Where Her Heart Speaks with Coach Catherine, where Catherine aims to challenge and disrupt ineffective thoughts and behaviors to help you not only embody peace, joy, calm, and certainty, but also help you live the life you've always dreamed of living. Follow Catherine on Facebook and Instagram at I Am Catherine James and visit www.catherinejames.com. Remember, to live the life of your dreams, you must go within and return to the place where your heart speaks.